who's next.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Sharif Abdel-Quddus, who is with Ahdaf Soueif in Tahrir. It's remarkable to be with both of you on this day that, well, it's planned 1 million women will march in Cairo. But Ahdaf, we wanted to ask you about your book, The Map of Love. You've written many books, but this book, which tells the story of Egypt in a very interesting way, going backwards and looking at it today. Why don't you lay out the plot, if you will, the storyline?
Oh, well, The Map of Love is two love stories, one that takes place at the end of the 20th century and one that takes place at the beginning. And in both stories, the love affair is between people of different cultures. So the woman is from the West and the man is from the Arab world. In the old story, he's Egyptian. In the new story, he is Egyptian-Palestinian-American. And basically, the novel tells the story of these two love affairs, and in doing so, it kind of traces what happened to Egypt in those 100 years, so sort of where we are now or where we were 10 years ago in terms of how we got there, and traces that back 100 years before. And it also explores, of course, the possibility of true cross-cultural relationships and whether they are, more possible now or were more possible 100 years ago. The role of language, when is language really a tool of communication and when it impedes communication, and so on. But of course the history and the politics are also central to the lives of the characters in the novel.
Let me ask you about the current situation in Egypt right now. Egypt's now ruled by a council of military, of army generals. We're far away from democracy. They have appointed a panel to make amendments to the Constitution. It's an 8-member panel. There's no women on this panel. They made their recommendations, and there's going to be a national referendum on them. First, what's your reaction to the fact that there's no women on the panel? But secondly, also, you said that a lot of work needs to be done on that day, on February 11th.
Well, of course, the way you put it sounds quite sort of, scary and negative. But the regime, as it left, some institution had to take control of the country until in transition. And the military were the obvious people to hand over to. And so the high command of the military is the acting president. Now, there have been two opinions ever since that happened. One is that this is a good way to go, and the other is that this military high command should have disbanded itself and put a sort of presidential council of military and civilian people. But really, I mean, people are not in agreement about this. There are arguments either side. The military put together an ad hoc committee of respected people, but really appointed by the military to effect very small changes in the Constitution. We know that we want the whole Constitution looked at and rewritten, and we in fact want it built very clearly on the Constitution of 1923 together with the Constitution of 1954 and amended to suit today. But what happened was that they put together this small committee of 8 people in order to change the articles that governed elections. The idea being that the country should go into elections as soon as possible and democratically elect a government which would then enable the military to go back to barracks, and then that's the end of the situation. The fact that it didn't have any women on it most of us think is irrelevant, because this, as I say, was put together very quickly by the military to do a very specific job of enabling the Constitution to enable us to have elections. And there will be a founding committee to discuss and change the whole Constitution, and that will be at least 40 people and will be representative of everybody at a later stage. So at the moment, of course, we don't look like we have a democratic process because we don't have one. But we are still in a well, we're in an infinitely better place than when we had the regime. And also we have caused the removal of the cabinet that was left by Mr. Mubarak, and we now have a cabinet and a prime minister who were put forward by revolutionary forces. So that is a very important...
But the military is cracking down. I mean, we've seen them jail activists, and recently one person who took part in a protest, a peaceful protest, was arrested, tried by military tribunal 2 days after he was arrested, sentenced to 5 years in prison. His name's Amr Abdullah al-Bahiri. Your sister was actually a witness to his arrest. Doesn't that concern you that the military rules by decree right now?
Yes, it concerns us very much, and people are, you know, protesting it and working against it. But we do understand that they are military. In the end, this is an army, and it's an army that did not carry out the revolution, that was not consulted about the revolution, and they have found themselves in this place where they are the caretakers, the guardians of the country and of the revolution, and the army itself is divided. So the top brass of the army were of course part of the regime, but the bulk of the army isn't, and the bulk of the army reflects the feelings of the country. And so they are, I mean, you know, there are balances in there are struggles in there, but taken as a whole, the sense is that the army so far does not want power, that the army is trying to do the job that it thinks it is there for, and they would like to return to barracks as soon as possible, and that's why they are pushing through this process of a tiny bit of constitutional reform, a kind of elections, so that they can go back to barracks. We're in a difficult situation because you could say that they're doing the right thing and that we should somehow get a civilian government that is elected in some way so that they can go back, or you can say that they should put in a presidential council which is not military and they should go back to barracks anyway and allow the democratic process to take longer.
You mentioned Ahdaf's sister. Your nephew, Ala Abd El Fattah, is a well-known activist blogger in Egypt. Sharif talked to him in Tahrir Square on the 15th day of the uprising. He described what he hoped the transition to a post-Mubarak Egypt would look like.
I personally dream of is revolutionary mandate, that we don't need to deal with the complexities of the current constitution. The current constitution was created by an illegitimate government anyway. I'm a radical leftist, but I can't claim that this is the general mood in the square or in other cities, you know, among the revolutionaries. Egyptians, it's amazing that this uprising is happening, and it's been an incredible one, but Egyptians are generally, you know, conservative in their action, and so the moment you remove the very hated enemies, I think I'd expect that a majority of them would ask for a more smoother transitions. There's also other benefits for smoother transitions, like right now we are really united, but there are topics that are very divisive. They're just not relevant right now. But if we, you know, immediately embark on writing a new constitution, revolutionary reshaping Egypt, we might have to start discussing secularism versus, you know, everyone wants a modern civic state, but
that was Ala Abd El Fattah, your nephew. I also want to play a clip of your niece, Mona Saif. She was very active in Tahrir, interviewed very often on international news networks. We interviewed her on Democracy Now! Several times, both in person and on the phone. And we reached her in the early morning hours of February 3rd, the night that Mubarak's thugs attacked. This is some of what she had to say.
We came here peacefully demanding for Mubarak to leave. We were so numerous yesterday. This is not our demand alone. This is the demand of the majority of Egyptians all over the country. We were here peacefully. Yesterday was such a festive day. If you saw the place, you would think it was a park. We had children playing and people chanting and dancing and singing. And now all of a sudden it's this war zone, just because they leased at us those thugs with their weapons and their knives and their cocktail Molotov thrown at us from rooftops. We are here because we've lost a lot of people for a certain demand and a certain cause, and we owe it to them to stick it and stay here.
That was Mona Saif, Ahdaf Soueif, your niece. What does it feel like to hear her talk so emotionally about that night?
Well, you know, it continues to move me. I mean, basically, the young people have been just incredibly, incredibly wonderful. And I mean, all the young people of my family were there and were there on that night. And I mean, Mona's younger sister, who's 17, was also in there. And
Can we play one little clip?
I actually spoke to Sanat as well. She had published a newspaper after Mubarak's fall to intentionally break Egyptian law. This is I asked her about the role of the youth. This is some of what she had to say.
It all started with an event, and we kind of told our friends and everything, and somehow it got bigger and bigger, and we realized that we have a very effective tool that we didn't realize that until it all flamed, kind of. So that's when we thought, well, we can actually do something. We have tools and we can do it, and well, we've done it while the grown-ups didn't, so we can actually do it. So that's when we got involved and started thinking of other things to do.
And did you ever imagine that this would happen?
No, not at all. I mean, it was a joke. I mean, people asked me, what are you going to do on the 25th? So I was like, yeah, I have a revolution. I'm not. I'm busy. But it was amazing. It was a perfect timing, actually.
So that was Sanat Saif, your niece, also. And she succeeded in publishing this newspaper called the Journal. It's available online and in print as well.
I have to ask before we end, Ahdaf, speaking of families, and we only have a minute, Sharif's grandfather, Hassan Abdel Qaddous, the great writer, if you were influenced by him, and also his great-grandmother, Rose El Yousef, speaking of two great families in Egypt.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, who wasn't influenced? Who didn't read all of Hassan Abdel Quddous's books and watch the films that were made from them and read, you know, the history of Rose El Yousef and the magazine that she produced and so on? It's, yeah, it's a big heritage, you know, and it tends to be that way.
Hassan Abdel Qaddous, how you characterize his writing?
Well, it was, I mean, you can think of it as big, romantic, easy-to-read novels, and then if you go a little bit below that, you will find that they are very liberationist, that they are feminist, in fact, and revolutionary. Yeah.
Well, speaking of revolutionary, I want to thank you very much, Ahdaf Soueif, for being with us. We'll all be at your speech tonight at Columbia University, the Edward Said Memorial Lecture. Thank you for being there in Tahrir and being with us on International Women's